2 days before my wedding, my future mother-in-law walked into my bedroom and told me to move out of it. Not my rented apartment. Not a hotel suite. Not a guest room somewhere she was paying for. My bedroom. In my house. She said it the way she said everything, with both hands gripping her purse strap, knuckles pale, chin lifted at an angle that suggested the room had always been hers, and she had simply misplaced it for a few years. She said, "Brenda is taking this room. You can have the guest suite." I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my linen pants, scrolled to one contact, and pressed call. And I watched Brenda Pelham's face go from triumph to confusion to something I can only describe as the specific panic of a person who has just realized she does not understand the room she is standing in. I handed her the phone, and the woman on the other end of the line said 4 words that rearranged everything. I owned the house. And in about 2 hours, Brenda was going to find out exactly what that meant. Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set a firm boundary with toxic in-laws who thought they could walk all over you. My name is Marlo, and I am 34 years old. For the past 2 years, I have been engaged to Russell Pelham, a commercial real estate broker with a confident handshake and a family that has never once looked at me without doing a quiet calculation of my net worth and finding the number disappointing. To Russell's family, I am a real estate paralegal at a small firm in Chicago, the kind of job that sounds respectable enough to mention at dinner without anyone asking follow-up questions. I live in a 4-bedroom Tudor revival on a tree-lined street in Evanston, Illinois, which the Pelhams have always assumed Russell helped me afford somehow, though none of them have ever asked the mechanics of how. They have their assumptions. I have the deed. Those are 2 very different things, and the distance between them is exactly where this story lives. I need to take you back about 3 years, because the day Brenda walked into my bedroom with a moving truck did not arrive without a long and well-documented runway. People like Brenda do not ambush you cleanly. They telegraph every move for years before they make it, and if you are paying attention, if you are the kind of person who has spent a career reviewing land records and parsing the fine print of title transfers, you collect every one of those telegraphed moves and you file them somewhere Brenda will never find. I had been paying attention since the first dinner. I remember the moment I understood what I was dealing with. It was November, the Thanksgiving before Russell and I got engaged, and Brenda had hosted at the family home in Wilmette, a sprawling colonial with a 3-car garage and the kind of landscaping that costs as much per year as some people's salaries. I brought a pie. Salted caramel apple from scratch in a ceramic dish my mother had left me. Brenda accepted it at the door with both hands, the same way she holds her purse when she is performing graciousness, and she said, "Oh, how precious." I actually have 3 pies already, but we will find somewhere to put this. She carried it to the kitchen counter and placed it behind the coffee maker, where it remained for the rest of the evening, invisible. I noticed the pie. I also noticed that she licked her front teeth twice, just barely, when she set it down. A small quick gesture, upper teeth, lower lip. Like she was savoring something. Russell did not notice. Russell was already pouring bourbon with his father. Brenda Pelham is 62 years old and spent 27 years as a regional manager for a major hotel chain, which means she has a professionally developed skill for making people feel like guests in their own lives. She performs helplessness with surgical precision, both hands clutching that purse, slightly widened eyes, a voice that climbs just half an octave when she wants someone to do something she would prefer not to ask for directly. It is an extraordinary performance. The first time I saw it, I almost admired the craft. Her sister Gail arrived at Thanksgiving in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and immediately began rearranging the centerpiece without asking anyone. Gail is 58, divorced twice, and she inhabits every room she enters with the quiet authority of a person who has decided that the room has been waiting specifically for her improvements. She moved 3 candle holders, repositioned a serving bowl, and announced that the table had better flow now. Brenda thanked her. No one else said anything. Russell's sister Tiffany was there too, 29 years old in a dress that cost more than my monthly utilities bill, half listening to a conversation on her phone while simultaneously dominating the conversation in the room. Tiffany had been a bridesmaid in 4 weddings in the previous 18 months and spoke about each one as though she had been the principal architect of its success. She glanced at me exactly twice over the course of the evening, once when I arrived and once when someone mentioned I lived in Evanston. The second glance was longer and had a texture to it. Evanston, she said, the way someone says the name of a city they have decided is slightly less impressive than expected. Russell said you have a house there. I do, I said. She waited for more. I did not provide more. There was this one Sunday, about 8 months into Russell and me being together, when his father Gordon brought up the house directly. Gordon Pelham is 66, retired from a career in insurance brokerage that he has polished into something grander over the years, and he has a way of asking questions that are not actually questions. We were at brunch, just the 4 of us, and he waited until the eggs arrived to say, "So Russell tells me you purchased your place in Evanston outright. No mortgage." He said it while cutting his food. How does a paralegal manage that? Russell looked at me. I looked at Gordon. Carefully, I said. Gordon smiled in a way that suggested he had decided I was lying and did not care to pursue it further. He tapped his coffee cup twice on the saucer, one of his habits, a signal of mild impatience. He deployed the way other people deploy punctuation, and moved the conversation to Russell's latest commercial listing. I went home that afternoon and opened the spreadsheet I keep on my laptop, the one I have labeled simply Record. I added Gordon's question, the date, the exact phrasing, and a note, has not followed up. Will not forget. I keep that spreadsheet the way other people keep a journal. Specific. Dated. Documented. Because I am, in my actual professional life, a licensed Illinois title attorney and the founding partner of Beckett Title and Trust LLC. I have been practicing since I passed the bar at 26. I opened the firm 2 years later. I am not a paralegal. I have never been a paralegal. What I am is a woman who decided, for reasons I will explain, to present a quieter version of herself to the family of the man she was falling in love with, and to watch what that family did with the assumption that she was smaller than she appeared. They did quite a lot with it, as it turned out. The house came first, before any of this. I bought it in cash 4 years before I ever met Russell Pelham. I was 28, and I had just received a wrongful death settlement, a number I do not say out loud often, and one I will not say here except to note that it was substantial and that it arrived all at once and that I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. My mother died when I was 25 in a hospital accident that should never have happened, and the 2 years after her death were the years I passed the bar, opened the firm, and converted one piece of the settlement into a 4-bedroom Tudor revival in Evanston, Illinois, held in a private LLC I call Beckett Title and Trust. The LLC's name is on the deed. My name is not on the deed in the way most people think of name on a deed. What is on the deed is an entity, and what controls that entity is a set of documents that took me and my attorney approximately 3 months to structure correctly. My attorney is Renee Foster. I planted Renee in this story early because she is important. Renee Foster is 51 years old, a law school mentor who supervised my moot court team during my 2nd year and who has spent the 2 decades since becoming what I can only describe as the most aggressive family law attorney in Cook County. She is small, precise, and has the kind of courtroom presence that makes opposing counsel check their notes twice before opening their mouths. I have coffee with Renee 4 times a year. I forward her interesting case law. She calls me when she needs a title opinion on a contested property. We have what I would describe as a professional friendship built on mutual respect and a shared understanding that documents matter more than feelings in any legal proceeding. I had called Renee the February before the wedding. Not because anything had happened yet, nothing had happened yet, technically, but because I had been watching the Pelham family for 2 years, and I had begun to sense a pattern in the way they discussed the house. Subtle things. Brenda once said, in front of Russell, that it was a shame the Tudor didn't have a larger master bath. The way you say something is a shame about a thing you are already imagining renovating. Tiffany had asked, once, whether there was a 2nd bedroom that stayed empty, And when I said there was a guest room, she had said, "Good to know," and changed the subject. In October, I was promoted. That is not the right word. I am the founding partner, so promotion is not quite the category. What happened is that Beckett Title and Trust LLC was retained by a commercial property trust to handle all their Cook County title work for the next 3 years, which is a contract that represents the most significant institutional relationship the firm has held since I opened it. Petra and I celebrated with dinner at a restaurant in the West Loop where the wine list is a document you need a law degree to navigate. I ordered the thing I wanted. I live in the Evanston house. The Tudor revival on the tree-lined street, with the original tile in the foyer and the arched doorway, and the restored plaster ceiling, and the landing floorboard that no longer creaks. The topographic map of the Great Lakes is in my office. The hall table from Portugal is beside it. The wedding dress, which is beautiful, is at a consignment shop on Dempster Street where the woman who runs it told me it would sell quickly. She was right. It sold in 11 days. I was not sentimental about it. It was a dress. The house is a house. And both of them were always exactly what I knew them to be, which is the thing about documentation. It does not change what something is. It only makes what it is impossible to misrepresent. And if there is anything this taught me, it is this. 1. The people who treat you like a room will always be surprised to discover you own the building. 2. Document everything, date everything, and let the record speak when the moment comes, because it will speak more clearly than you ever could in anger. 3. The only people worth letting close are the ones who asked the right questions from the beginning, not to test you, but because they genuinely wanted to understand. Was I wrong to let 2 years pass without telling Russell the truth about who I was, knowing the whole time that the family he came from would eventually try to take something that was mine? Tell me in the comments. Hit subscribe and comment deed if you have ever had to stand in a room someone tried to take from you and decide, quietly, that you were not going to move. I told Renee about the pattern. She told me to bring her the LLC formation documents, the deed, and the operating agreement the next time I came in. I did. She went through them, annotated 3 sections, and told me that if anyone attempted to occupy the property without my explicit authorization, I would have civil and criminal trespass remedies available within the same business day. Within the same business day, I repeated. 2 hours, she said, if you call me first. I added that conversation to my spreadsheet. I dated it February 22nd. The spring that followed was full of wedding planning, which is to say it was full of Brenda. Brenda had opinions about the venue. We were using my father's lake house in Wisconsin, which she had visited once and described as rustic in a charming way, which I understood to mean she found it modest. She had opinions about the caterer, about the flowers, about the seating chart, about whether a Sunday ceremony was appropriate or whether we should move it to a Saturday. She delivered these opinions with both hands on her purse strap and a tone of gentle bafflement, as though she were simply offering information she assumed would be welcome. Russell relayed many of these opinions to me as though they were reasonable starting points for negotiation. I remember one specific evening, a Thursday in April, about 6 weeks before the wedding. Russell and I were sitting at the kitchen island in the Evanston house, my kitchen, my island, my house, and he was going through a list on his phone of things my mom thought we should reconsider. Item 3 on the list was the guest room situation. Brenda had apparently mentioned, again, that if family was coming in from out of town, it would make sense to have the largest bedroom available for guests. She's not wrong, Russell said, not looking up from his phone. I set my coffee cup down. Which family? I said. Her sister. Maybe Tiffany. They're coming up the night before. Tiffany has her own apartment. It's 20 minutes away. Mom thought it would be nice if everyone was together. I looked at him for a moment. He was still looking at his phone. I noticed, in the kitchen window behind him, the reflection of 2 people who were not having the same conversation, and I noted the date in the back of my mind. I'll think about it, I said. I did not think about it. What I did was call Renee the next morning and ask her a question about no trespass enforcement timelines. She told me again. I added it to the spreadsheet. I should tell you about the week before the wedding, because it matters. Tiffany had sent a text on the Monday asking whether she could drop some things off at the house to make the pre-wedding weekend easier. I said I'd need to know what things. She said, just some boxes, my dress stuff, some toiletries. I said the guest room was available Friday morning. She said, great, I'll come Thursday. I did not reply to the Thursday message. When I came home Thursday evening, there were 3 large moving boxes stacked in the second guest room. They had a label in Tiffany's handwriting, Tiff Evanston. Not guest room. Not temporary. Evanston, as though the room had been assigned a permanent address. I stood in the doorway of that guest room for about 4 seconds. Then I went to my office, opened my laptop, and sent Renee a text that said, "The week has begun." She responded with a thumbs up and the words, "I'll keep my phone on." That was Thursday. Friday afternoon arrived the way Fridays before weddings are supposed to, with a checklist and a finalized seating chart and a dress hanging in a garment bag on the back of the closet door. I had taken the day off from the firm. I was going through a binder of vendor confirmations on the kitchen island when I heard the sound that every homeowner knows and no homeowner should ever hear on a Friday afternoon 2 days before her wedding. The sound of a large diesel engine parking in the driveway. Then a second one. I walked to the front window and looked out at Greenleaf Avenue, where 2 yellow moving trucks had parked diagonally across my driveway, not parallel to the curb, not pulled forward to leave room for other cars, but diagonally, at an angle that blocked the entire width of the drive and part of the sidewalk, and announced to every neighbor within sight that something significant was about to be unloaded. The afternoon sun was still high, early June bright and a little too warm, and the leaves on the oak trees along the street cast shadows across the yellow trucks that made the whole scene look like something out of a film. The kind where you already know from the establishing shot that something is about to go very wrong. Brenda Pelham stepped out of the cab of the first truck. She was wearing a cream pantsuit with a coral-colored blouse beneath it, and she had her purse on her arm, both hands already finding the strap before her feet had fully hit the pavement. Gail stepped out behind her, in a floral-wrapped dress, already looking at the facade of my house with the expression she reserves for spaces she has decided need her improvements. Behind them, a moving crew. 4 men in gray shirts, waiting. And behind the moving crew, coming around the side of the second truck with his hands in his pockets and his phone in one hand, Russell. My fiancé. He was on the phone. He glanced up at the house. He did not glance toward the front window where I was standing. He walked to the front door and held it open for his mother. I want to tell you what that looked like from the inside. I want to tell you what it is to stand in a house you bought with cash, that you hold through a legal entity, that you spent 4 years renovating one room at a time, and watch the man you are 2 days from marrying hold the door open for the woman who is about to walk into your bedroom and tell you to get out of it. I want to tell you what that registers as in the body. It registered in my sternum, a kind of compression, the air going briefly difficult. My hand found the edge of the kitchen island and pressed against it. That was the only outward thing. I smoothed my shirt. I walked toward the foyer. Brenda came through the front door with the momentum of someone who had already decided the outcome of the next hour. She did not say hello. She looked at the foyer, the original tile, the arched doorway, the restored plaster ceiling I had spent $11,000 and 4 months on, and she said, "Good. Gail, the sideboard can go right here." She pointed to the space beside the coat closet where I keep a narrow hall table with a lamp I brought back from a trip to Portugal. Gail was already at the staircase. I said, "Brenda." She turned. She looked at me with the wide, slightly patient expression she uses when she has already made a decision and is waiting for the person in front of her to catch up. "Marlo, we talked about this with Russell. The arrangements make much more sense with us here for the full weekend. Gail and I will take the master. You'll be perfectly comfortable in the guest suite, and Tiffany is already in the second guest room, as you know." She paused. She licked her front teeth, once, twice, a small and quick movement. "It's just 2 nights. Just 2 nights. In my bedroom. In my house." Russell was standing in the doorway behind her. He had put his phone away. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as carefully arranged neutrality, the look of a man who has made an agreement he hopes will not require him to defend. "Russ," I said, It's just logistics, Marlo. The lake house has a lot of rooms, but the drive's long and… Did you sign something for the moving company? A pause. Brief but measurable. I coordinated it, yeah. I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Then I went upstairs. Brenda was already in my bedroom doorway when I reached the landing. She had both hands on her purse strap, chin tilted at that particular angle, and she turned to look at me with the expression of a woman who has concluded the hard part is over. Brenda is taking this room, she said. You can have the guest suite. She said it the way someone recites a decision that has already been ratified by a higher authority. Matter of fact. Final. Slightly kind, even the way you are kind to someone you are rearranging against their preferences. Behind her, Gail was already opening the closet. The movers were on the stairs. Russell was downstairs. I could hear him talking to someone on his phone again. I stood in the hallway outside my own bedroom door and I felt the compression in my sternum again, and then I felt something else, something that is harder to name, but that I have felt before in courtrooms, at the moment before a title dispute resolves in my client's favor. A kind of clarity. A narrowing. The feeling of knowing exactly which document controls the situation and knowing that the other party does not. I reached into my pocket. I scrolled to Renee Foster in my contacts. I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. I said 3 words, "It's happening now." Renee said, "How many people in the property?" I counted. 5 plus 4 movers. Address? I gave it. "Give me 8 minutes to pull the operating agreement," she said. "Then hand them the phone." I walked back to my bedroom doorway. Brenda had moved to the window and was describing to Gail how she thought the furniture arrangement would work better with the bed against the opposite wall. The movers were waiting on the landing. Gail had my jewelry box in her hands. I let the phone ring through to speaker. "Mrs. Pelham," I said. Brenda turned. I held out the phone. She looked at it the way people look at something they were not expecting to be real. Then she took it, slowly, both hands still finding the purse strap first as though she needed to set something down before she could accept the new information. "Hello," she said. And I watched Brenda Pelham's face change. I watched it go from the comfortable certainty of a woman who has arranged the room in her mind to something I can only describe as recalibration. The chin came down. The hands tightened on the purse. Her eyes moved to me and away and back to me, and I saw the moment she understood that the woman on the other end of that phone was not a secretary, was not a paralegal's colleague, was not anyone a person calls for comfort. She was listening. Her mouth opened once and closed. She held the phone out to me. "She wants to talk to you," Brenda said. Her voice had lost its altitude. I took the phone. I walked to the top of the stairs. Downstairs, Russell had stopped talking. He was looking up at me. I said to Renee, quietly enough that only she and I could hear it, "How long?" Renee said, "I'm filing the no trespass enforcement right now. Evanston PD can have a unit there in 90 minutes. I'd suggest you let them know, clearly, that the LLC holds title, that no permission has been granted for occupancy, and that I will be filing civil trespass damages against any individual who signed the moving company documentation before end of business today." I looked down the stairs at Russell. "Before end of business today," I repeated. I heard him, from the bottom of the stairs, say my name. Quietly. The way people say a name when they have just understood something. "Renee," I said, "please file it." "Already done," she said. "Call me when they leave." I hung up. I turned to the landing. The 4 movers were standing in a row, waiting with the particular patience of men who are paid by the hour and have learned not to get involved in the domestic situations that frame their job. Brenda was behind them. Gail had set my jewelry box down, I noticed, and had both hands clasped in front of her. I said, calmly, to the nearest mover, "I need you to take whatever your crew has brought into this house back to your trucks. The property owner has not authorized this move and a no trespass enforcement is being filed with Evanston PD as of this moment. You will receive documentation within the hour. If you have questions about your contract, I would direct them to the man who signed your invoice." The mover looked at me. He looked at Brenda. He looked back at me. "Ma'am," he said, carefully, "we were hired by—" "I know who hired you," I said. "That is exactly the problem." I looked at Brenda. Her hands were white on the purse strap. She licked her teeth once, just barely, a reflex she couldn't quite stop. But there was no savor in it this time. I turned and walked downstairs to have a conversation with my fiancé and to find out exactly how badly and exactly how far he had miscalculated. Because what Russell did not know, what none of them knew, was that the moment he signed that moving company invoice, he had not simply coordinated a logistical inconvenience. He had handed a title attorney, on a silver platter, the standing to file a civil trespass suit against him personally before our wedding even began. And before that night was over, Renee Foster was going to make sure he understood every single word of what that meant. I picked up my phone one more time and sent Renee a forward message. It said, "Get the invoice too." Renee typed back immediately, "Already ahead of you." The sun was still up. It was barely past 5 in the afternoon. The yellow trucks were still in my driveway. Russell was still standing at the bottom of my stairs. And I had the full night ahead of me to let every single person in that house learn the same lesson at exactly the same speed. I own this house. All of them were about to find out what that meant for them. I found Russell in the kitchen. He was standing at the island, my island, in my kitchen, in the house he had apparently decided belonged to his family's weekend itinerary, and he had his phone face down on the counter and his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who is deciding, in real time, which version of the next 5 minutes he wants to attempt. I set my own phone on the counter. I pulled out a stool. I sat down. "Tell me," I said, "from the beginning. Whose idea was this?" Russell uncrossed his arms. "Marlo. From the beginning, Russ." He pulled out the stool across from me and sat, which I noted. Sitting is a posture of a person who thinks they have time. I let him have the posture. He said it was his mother's idea originally, which I had already assumed, but that he had agreed it made sense for the family to be together the night before the wedding rather than dispersed across different addresses. He said Brenda had suggested the room arrangement because she has a bad hip and the guest suite requires climbing more stairs. He said Tiffany had been given the second guest room because her apartment is 20 minutes away and the pre-wedding schedule was early. He said he had coordinated the moving company because Brenda had some furniture she wanted to have there for the weekend, not permanent, just for the weekend, and it was easier than multiple car trips. He said all of this in a reasonable, organized voice, the voice he uses in commercial real estate presentations, and when he finished, he looked at me with the expression of a man who believes he has explained the situation adequately. "You signed the moving company invoice," I said. A pause. "I arranged the booking, yeah. Did you sign it?" He looked at the counter. "I might have. It's just a service agreement." From upstairs, the sound of Brenda's voice, giving the movers directions in a register that had lost some of its certainty, but had not yet fully retreated. I said, "Russell, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The house on Greenleaf Avenue is owned by a private LLC. My LLC. The deed does not have your name on it, and it does not have your mother's name on it, and the operating agreement of Beckett Title and Trust does not list you as an authorized occupant, a co-owner, or an agent of the entity. What that means, practically, is that every person in this house right now who was not explicitly invited by me is trespassing. What it also means is that the individual who contracted a moving service to bring property into a privately held building without authorization from the title entity is personally liable for the resulting damages." He stared at me. "That individual," I said, "signed the invoice." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Through the window I could hear the oak leaves moving and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, and somewhere upstairs the sound of Gail saying something about the view. Russell said, slowly, "Marlo, what are you talking about? You're a paralegal." I did not correct him yet. I let the word sit between us on the island like a document waiting to be signed. "Renee Foster is filing a no trespass enforcement with Evanston PD right now," I said. "A unit will be here within 90 minutes. I would strongly suggest that you go upstairs, tell your mother that the movers need to take everything back to their trucks, and have everyone out of this house voluntarily before the officers arrive. Because voluntary departure looks very different in a civil proceeding than being removed." He opened his mouth. "That's not a threat, Russ. It's a filing timeline." He closed his mouth. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had never seen on him before, not anger, not defensiveness, but something more like the look of a person examining a map and discovering that the landmark they thought was a park is actually a courthouse. He pushed back from the island and went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I could hear him talking to Brenda, his voice low and urgent, and I could hear Brenda's voice rising and then dropping. I could hear the particular creak of the landing floorboard that I have always meant to fix and never have, and then the sound of Gail saying something sharp and brief. Then footsteps on the stairs. Brenda appeared in the kitchen doorway with both hands on her purse strap and a new configuration on her face, not the triumph she had walked in with, but something I recognized as the rearguard maneuver. The performance of wounded reasonableness that she deploys when the first performance has failed. "Marlo," she said, in the softer register, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We are family. We are going to be family." I was only trying to make the weekend run more smoothly. I looked at her. "I understand that's what you thought you were doing," I said. She waited. Her hands tightened. "The officers are still coming," I said. Her chin lifted fractionally, and then she licked her front teeth once, twice, the reflex she cannot quite suppress, and this time I watched it carefully, because it is a tell that works in one direction. She does it when she thinks she has won. But she was not winning anything. She was doing it out of habit, or out of anxiety, or out of the muscle memory of a woman who has spent 62 years walking into rooms and rearranging them, and finding that no one stops her. "You are making a mistake," she said, quietly. "Russell will remember this." From behind her, in the doorway, Russell. He had heard her. He looked at his mother. He looked at me. And for exactly one moment, I saw something cross his face that was neither the real estate broker composure nor the wounded husband-to-be expression, something that looked, briefly, like the face of a man who was seeing two rooms at the same time and understanding that he had been standing in the wrong one. It lasted about 3 seconds. Then Gail came down the stairs with her floral wrap dress and her certainty and said, "Brenda, the movers need a decision," and the moment closed. I took my glass of water and went to my home office. I had phone calls to make, and I preferred to make them somewhere with a door. There was this one night, about 14 months before all of this, when I understood the shape of what the Pelham family actually wanted from me. It was Russell's parents' anniversary dinner, a Saturday in April at a restaurant in the Gold Coast, one of those places where the lighting is designed to make everyone look more successful than they feel. And the wine list is a document you need a law degree to navigate. Gordon had reserved a private room. There were 12 of us around the table, Gordon and Brenda, Gail, Tiffany and her boyfriend at the time, 2 of Gordon's golf partners and their wives, Russell's aunt from Naperville, and me. I was the only person at the table without a specific institutional affiliation that could be mentioned in a sentence. Introductions went around the room. Gordon's golf partner was a retired appellate judge. His wife sat on a hospital board. Tiffany's boyfriend was in private equity. Gail was described by Brenda as a creative in the way people say a creative to mean that the specifics are too complicated to explain and also slightly embarrassing. I was introduced as Russell's fiancée. She's in real estate. Just in real estate. Not even the firm name. Russell did not correct it. He was pouring wine. The retired judge turned to me and asked what kind of real estate. Title work, mostly, I said, which was accurate enough and specific enough to close the question for most people. He nodded and turned to Gordon. I watched his wife across the table reach for the bread basket, and I noticed that she had not looked at me once since the introduction, and I filed that away in the spreadsheet of the mind. At one point during the dinner, Gordon made a toast. It was a lovely toast, gracious and well-structured, something about the architecture of a family and the rooms that different people bring to it. He was a better speaker than I had expected. And at the end of it, after everyone had raised their glasses, he looked down the table at me and said, with the warmth of a man who has decided to be generous, "And we are so glad Marlo has become one of our rooms." One of their rooms. Not one of their people. Not one of their family. A room. I smiled. I raised my glass. "I thought, I own more rooms than you know." I did not say that. I went through the rest of the dinner being pleasant and asking follow-up questions and laughing at the appropriate moments, and I drove home at 11:15 and sat in my driveway for exactly 4 minutes before going inside. Then I opened the spreadsheet and I added Gordon's toast, word for word, and I dated it and I saved the file and I went to bed. The pattern had been consistent for 2 years. I was the room. I was the logistics. I was the Evanston house that needed its master bedroom rearranged. I was Russell's pleasant, confident, slightly mysterious fiancé who had somehow managed to buy a 4-bedroom Tudor without anyone being able to figure out the math, and the family's solution to the mystery was not to ask me about it, but to decide, collectively, that there must be something slightly irregular about the money and to proceed on that assumption. What that meant in practice was this. No one had ever asked about the firm. No one had ever Googled Beckett Title and Trust. No one had ever looked up the Cook County property records for the Greenleaf Avenue address and noticed that the listed owner was a limited liability company and wondered who controlled it. Russell, who is a commercial real estate broker and who has made his career on understanding how properties are held and titled, had never once in 2 years of engagement looked up the deed on the house he slept in 3 nights a week. I had noticed this the way I notice everything, specifically, early, and with a notation. The LLC had been established 4 years before I met Russell at the offices of the attorney who handled my mother's wrongful death settlement. His name was Douglas Arrieta, and he is meticulous and methodical and the kind of lawyer who structures entities the way engineers build bridges for the load that will someday be applied to them, not just for the current weather. Douglas set up Beckett Title and Trust with a single-member operating agreement, a private ownership register, and a quiet title policy that would survive any challenge short of a federal proceeding. When I told him, the spring before Russell and I got engaged, that I was planning to marry and wanted to understand my options regarding the property, Douglas spent 45 minutes walking me through the exact documentation that would need to exist in order for any co-ownership claim to attach to the LLC. None of that documentation existed. None of it had ever been offered, discussed, or suggested. I owned the house absolutely and without encumbrance, the way I own the firm and the operating agreement and the title policy, because I had taken the settlement from my mother's death and turned it into something she would have recognized, a foundation. Something built correctly from the beginning, without shortcuts, without the kind of casual paperwork that leaves gaps for people to walk through. No one in the Pelham family had ever asked me who Douglas Arrieta was. They were about to find out that Renee Foster was the more pressing question. I was on the phone with Renee for 11 minutes. She had already filed the no trespass enforcement. She had already pulled the LLC operating agreement from the state business registry and the title records from Cook County. She had already identified, on the moving company's electronic filing system, she has a contact, she always has a contact, that the invoice for the Greenleaf Avenue job had been signed by one Russell Gordon Pelham with a personal credit card. Personal credit card, I said. Personal. Not a business account, not an LLC, not a joint account. Him. Her voice had the particular flatness of a person who has just confirmed something she already suspected and is now moving to the next step. That gives you civil trespass standing against him individually. We can file before end of business today. The damages exposure is not enormous, but it's not trivial either, and more importantly, it goes on record before the wedding, which means if this proceeds to any kind of family law proceeding in the future. It's going to proceed to one, I said. A pause. Then, okay. How long do I have to decide about the wedding? Legally? You have as long as you want. Practically, if you want the filing to establish a clean pre-marriage record of the trespass and his role in it, you want it done before any ceremony creates a marital community. I looked at the wall of my home office. I had a framed print there, a topographical map of the Great Lakes region, something I had bought at an estate sale years ago because I liked the way it showed the land and the water as equally weighted, equally documented, neither one more real than the other. I had looked at that map 100 times in that room without thinking about it. I thought about it now. File it, I said. And Renee, pull the invoice. I want the full documentation. Already requested, she said. I'll have it within the hour. I heard her typing. Then she said, in the tone of someone setting down a cup, "Marlo, are you all right?" I considered the question. Not emotionally, I knew what I felt emotionally, or I knew what I was not allowing myself to feel right now, which is a different kind of knowing, but practically. Whether I was all right. "I'm in my office," I said. "In my house. And the movers are leaving. So yes." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Call me when they're out." I hung up. I went back to the kitchen. The moving crew had come down the stairs with 2 boxes, not furniture, as it turned out, because most of Brenda's planned furniture rearrangement had still been on the trucks, which meant the damage was containable, and they were loading those boxes back into the cab. One of the movers glanced at me as he passed through the foyer, and I held the door for him, and he said, quietly, "Sorry about this, ma'am," and I said, "Not your doing," and he nodded and went out. Russell was sitting in the living room. Not on his phone. Just sitting. Brenda and Gail were in the foyer putting their shoes back on, which is the physical vocabulary of women who have decided to leave, but have not yet decided how to narrate the leaving. Tiffany was on the stairs with her jacket over her arm, looking at her phone with the particular focus of someone who is not actually looking at her phone. Brenda finished with her shoes. She straightened. She looked at me with both hands on her purse strap. "I want you to know," she said, "that I am doing this for the family." "I know," I said. "Russell needs to understand what he's taking on." I looked at her. "He's beginning to." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she licked her front teeth, the reflex, once, twice, and this time there was something underneath it that was not triumph. It was something more like recognition, the expression of a woman who has just realized, for the first time in the encounter, that she is not the most prepared person in the room. She walked out. Gail followed without speaking, which was the most surprising thing she had done all evening. Tiffany came down the stairs, picked up the 1 box she had managed to deposit in the guest room, and said to no one in particular, "This is insane," and went out the front door. I closed it behind them. The house was very quiet. I walked back to the living room doorway. Russell was still on the couch, forearms on his knees, looking at the floor. The evening light was coming through the front windows at an angle that made the room look warm, the way rooms look when the day is ending and the house is doing what houses do, holding the light it has caught. He said, without looking up, "You're a paralegal." I said no. He looked up. "My name is on a bar card," I said. "It's been there for 8 years. I'm the founding partner of Beckett Title and Trust. The LLC owns this house. Your signature is on a moving company invoice that constitutes personal liability for unauthorized entry to a privately held property." I paused. "Renee Foster is filing the civil documentation tonight." He stared at me. "Who," he said slowly, "is Renee Foster?" "She is the most aggressive family law attorney in Cook County," I said. "She taught me appellate procedure in my 2nd year of law school. And right now she is building a paper record of tonight that will exist regardless of what happens between you and me this weekend." The sun was going down outside. Through the front window I could see the end of my driveway, where the yellow trucks had been parked at their diagonal angle, and which was now empty. The oak trees on Greenleaf Avenue were doing what they do in early June evenings, moving slightly in the lake wind, looking exactly as they always look, unchanged by the particular drama that had unfolded in front of them. Russell said my name. He said it quietly, not the way he says it when he wants something, but the way he said it when we first met, in a bar in Lincoln Park on a Tuesday in October, when he had looked at me across a table and said it like a question he was testing the weight of. I said, "I need you to go to your mother's tonight." He looked at the floor again. "And Russell," I said, "don't sign anything else without calling an attorney first. Not tonight." I walked back to my office. I pulled up the spreadsheet. I added the date, it was June 7th, and I added a single note that summarized the evening in 4 words. Then I called Renee back. "They're out," I said. "Good," she said. "I need to talk to you about something." The invoice has a second signature. Below Russell's. I was quiet for a moment. "Whose?" I said. Renee said, "His mother authorized the job. She is listed as the co-contracting party. Both of them are on the liability exposure." I sat with that for about 4 seconds. "Renee," I said, "what time does your office open in the morning?" For you, she said, 7. The night was just starting. The wedding was in 48 hours, which is a long time when you have the right documents and the right attorney and a house that has never, not for a single day of its existence, belonged to anyone but you. I opened my laptop. I had work to do. I did not sleep well, which is unusual for me. I am the kind of person who sleeps the way I approach most things methodically, in the time I have allocated for it, without a great deal of drama. But that Friday night I lay in my own bed, in my own bedroom, and I listened to the house settle around me the way houses do when they are empty of everyone except the person who belongs there, and I thought about Russell's face when he said, "You're a paralegal," and the specific quality of the silence that followed when I told him he was wrong. I was up at 5:15. I made coffee. I went through my files, the actual files, the physical folder I keep in the bottom drawer of my office desk, behind the hanging folder labeled Vendor Contracts, because I like a label that tells you exactly nothing useful at a glance. Inside that folder, the Beckett Title and Trust LLC operating agreement, the Cook County deed recording, the title insurance policy issued by Douglas Arrieta's firm, the original purchase settlement documentation from my mother's case, and a 4-page memo I had written to myself in January of the previous year titled simply Contingency Protocol, Greenleaf Avenue. I had written it after the April dinner where Gordon described me as one of their rooms. The memo was not dramatic. It was the kind of document I produce because I am a title attorney and I think in contingencies the way some people think in feelings. It laid out, in clean numbered paragraphs, the legal instruments available to me in the event of unauthorized property interference, which is the technical phrase for what had happened the previous evening. It named Renee Foster as lead counsel. It referenced Douglas Arrieta as the LLC's formation attorney. It identified 3 specific remedies: the temporary restraining order, the no trespass enforcement, and the civil trespass suit. 2 of those 3 remedies were now active. The third was a question of how the next 48 hours unfolded. I went through the invoice documentation that Renee had forwarded at 11:43 the previous night. The moving company was a licensed operation out of Skokie, not fly-by-night, which was interesting because it meant there was a contract trail that would hold up in discovery. The invoice listed the job as a residential relocation, partial, with a destination address of Greenleaf Avenue in Evanston, and the authorized parties were listed as Russell Gordon Pelham and Brenda and Pelham. Both signatures were on the authorization line. The job had been booked 4 days earlier, on a Monday, which meant this had been planned while Russell and I were finalizing the rehearsal dinner seating chart together at this same kitchen island. While we were deciding where to seat his aunt from Naperville. While we were going over the vendor confirmation binder. I added to my spreadsheet, Monday, June 3rd. Invoice booked. Destination, Greenleaf Avenue. Authorized by both. Then I texted Renee, 7 works. I'll bring the full file. She replied at 5:22, coffee's on. Renee Foster's office is on the 14th floor of a building on North Michigan Avenue that has the kind of lobby that makes you feel, from the moment you walk through the revolving door, that the building has already assessed you and found you adequate. Her firm occupies half the floor. The other half is a wealth management group whose name I will not say because it is not relevant, but whose presence always strikes me as appropriate, money and its legal protection sharing a floor, which is essentially what all good practice amounts to. I arrived at 6:58. Her assistant, a young man named Marcus who has worked for Renee for 3 years and who has the energy of someone who has long ago made peace with early mornings, let me in and poured coffee without asking. Renee was already at her desk, which is a large glass surface with nothing on it except a legal pad, a pen, her laptop, and whatever case she is currently living inside of. She was in a charcoal blazer, no jewelry, hair pulled back, looking at her laptop screen with the expression of someone reading a document and finding it interesting in the way a veterinarian finds a complicated X-ray interesting. She looked up when I came in. "Sit down," she said. "I want to show you something." I sat. She turned the laptop On the screen was the Cook County Civil Court filing she had submitted at 9:47 the previous evening, the no trespass enforcement, with attached property records showing Beckett Title and Trust LLC as the sole title holder. Below it, in a separate document, was the opening of a civil trespass complaint naming Russell Gordon Pelham and Brenda and Pelham as co-defendants. "It's not yet filed," she said. "It's drafted. I wanted you here before I pressed the button." "What does the damages exposure look like?" I said. She turned the laptop back. "Actual damages are going to be modest. There was no property destruction. The boxes were removed. But trespass by a co-contracting party on an LLC property creates a category of compensatory exposure that includes legal fees. With my billing rate on an emergency Saturday filing, you are looking at a fee-shifting argument that could expose them to," she named a figure, "which is not the number that matters. The number that matters is that this creates a premarital civil record." "Before any ceremony creates community," I said. "Before any ceremony creates community," she confirmed. She laced her fingers on the desk. "Renee has the hands of someone who has spent 30 years holding pens and making arguments, precise and still, the way tools are still when they are not in use." "Marlo," she said, "tell me what you want." I had thought about this in the car on the way downtown. I had thought about it lying in bed at 5 in the morning. I had thought about it standing in my doorway watching Brenda Pelham tell me to move out of my own bedroom. I had thought, on and off, for the previous 2 years, about the moment when it would stop being productive to wait and start being necessary to act, and whether those 2 moments would announce themselves clearly or arrive the way most things arrive in legal proceedings, gradually and then all at once. "I want the record," I said. "I want the civil filing. And I want to think, before today is over, about whether the wedding happens." Renee did not react to this with surprise. She is not a person who reacts with surprise. She picked up her pen, and in the margin of her legal pad, she wrote something I could not see from across the desk. "If the wedding does not happen," she said, "and given that no marital community exists, you have a clean slate. The LLC is untouched. The house is untouched. The only legal entanglement is the civil suit, which is actually helpful. It establishes, on paper, that the relationship produced documented harm to you prior to any marital formation." "And if it does happen," I said. "If it does happen, we need prenuptial documentation that is airtight, signed, and witnessed before the ceremony, which we cannot get done in 48 hours at a standard quality." I looked at the framed print on Renee's office wall. She has a print of the Illinois state court system, a kind of flowchart of authority, framed in simple black. I have always found it oddly comforting, the way a clear organizational chart is comforting. "He didn't know I was an attorney," I said. "No," Renee said. 2 years. "No. He is a commercial real estate broker. He has transacted property in this city for 12 years. He never looked up the deed." Renee was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very evenly, "Marlo, what I am about to say is my professional opinion and also my personal one, which I am offering because you are not just a client. The decision you are facing is not really a legal question. The legal instruments are ready. The documents are either filed or draftable within the hour. The institution that will enforce them is aware and capable." She paused. "The question is what you want to be true on the other side of this weekend." I looked at the flowchart on her wall. "File it," I said. She nodded. She turned back to the laptop. "Both names," I said. "Russell and Brenda." She typed. She clicked. She did not make it dramatic, because Renee Foster does not make things dramatic. She simply does the next thing the situation requires, which is one of the reasons I have trusted her for 8 years. "Filed," she said. 9 minutes after 7. "You'll have the docket number in your email within the hour." She closed the laptop. "What do you want to do about Russell directly?" "I'm going to call him at 9, I said. "After the filing is in his email." "What are you going to say?" "I'm going to say that he has until noon to have a response from his attorney on the civil filing, and that if he does not have personal counsel by noon, I would suggest he retain one immediately, and that until he does, any communication about the wedding or the house or the family arrangements should go through you." Renee looked at me for a moment. "And the wedding itself," she said. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I picked up my bag and the physical file and the coffee cup Marcus had poured, and I held the cup for a moment because it was warm and I had not slept, and warmth is warmth regardless of the situation. The wedding, I said, is at my father's lake house in Wisconsin. My father's name is Calvin Beckett. He has spent 31 years in land restoration and sustainable forestry, and he has a property on a lake that he has maintained and stewarded since before I was born. He is 63 years old, and he is the person who drove me to the courthouse when I passed the bar, and he is the person I called on the night my mother died. I set the coffee cup down. He does not know yet what happened last night. I am going to drive up to Wisconsin this morning and tell him in person. Renee said, and then I said, I am going to come back and do what the situation requires. She picked up her pen. I'll be available all day. I know, I said. I went to the elevator. Marcus held the lobby door. I walked out onto North Michigan Avenue in the early June morning, with the lake somewhere to the east past the buildings and the traffic just beginning its Saturday volume, and I stood on the sidewalk for exactly 1 moment before I started walking to my car. The civil complaint was filed. The no trespass enforcement was active. Russell's personal liability was documented. Brenda's co-authorization was on record. Tiffany's unauthorized boxes had been removed. The house was clear. The LLC was secure. The deed had not moved. Everything that was mine was still mine. It had always been mine. The question was no longer about the house. The question was about what kind of woman I was going to be on the other side of this particular Friday night. I had spent 8 years building a professional identity around the idea that documents are the architecture of consequences, that what you sign and what you file and what you record is the real story, not the performance around it. Brenda Pelham had performed entitled helplessness. Russell had performed reasonable logistics. Gail had performed the expert arranger. Tiffany had performed the aggrieved young sister. And I had stood in my hallway and made 1 phone call. The performance was over. The documentation was running now. I drove north toward Wisconsin with the windows down and the early June air coming through the car and the sun on the eastern horizon turning the lake color, the specific pale gold that the lake turns on clear mornings. And I thought about my father at his kitchen table with his coffee and his maps of the property, which he updates by hand every season, and I thought about what I was going to say to him and what he was going to say back. Calvin Beckett is not a man who says much when the situation is already clear. He would hear the outline. He would set his coffee down. He would look at the map of the property on the table, which shows every tree stand and every water feature and every building on the 42 acres he has managed for 31 years. And he would say I expected exactly what I needed to hear, which would be specific and brief, and would contain within it everything I needed to walk back into that situation with the particular kind of calm that is not detachment, but precision. I had the invoice. I had the filing. I had the deed. What I was driving toward at 70 miles an hour on a Saturday morning in early June with the windows open and the city falling away behind me was the last piece, the part that is not legal and not financial and not institutional, but that is, in its own way, as load-bearing as any of the documents I had filed. By the time I came back to Evanston, everyone was going to understand what they had done. And the wedding was never going to happen. Not because the documents had forced it. Documents don't force choices, they just make the choices visible, which is the most honest thing they do. The wedding was not going to happen because I had driven to my father's lake house in Wisconsin and stood in his kitchen and told him what Russell had signed, and what Brenda had authorized, and what Renee had filed. And my father had listened to all of it without interrupting, which is a skill he has and which I have always been grateful for, and when I finished he had set his coffee cup down and looked at me across his kitchen table and said, very quietly, "Did he ever ask you how you bought the house?" I said no. My father looked at his map. He said, "Then he's been living in a house he didn't understand for 2 years. And people who don't understand the house they're living in don't take care of it right." I drove back to Evanston with the late afternoon sun in the western mirror and Renee on Bluetooth and a clarity that I can only describe as the feeling of a document that has been correctly drafted and properly witnessed and filed in the right court at the right time. Everything was in order. The confrontation was 12 hours away. Russell still did not know that I had driven to Wisconsin, or what my father had said, or that Renee had already drafted the next 2 instruments that would be needed, the ones that would follow the civil complaint like chapters in a very well-organized brief. He still thought, somewhere in the structure of his understanding, that this was a situation that could be reasoned through. That the right conversation, the right apology, the right rearrangement of the weekend's logistics could bring things back to a workable state. He was about to discover what I had known since 9 minutes past 7 that morning. Some documents, once filed, do not unfile. Some deeds, once recorded, do not amend. And some women, once they have handed you the phone and watched your face change, have already made every decision that matters. The sun went down over Evanston. The oak trees on Greenleaf Avenue were dark against the sky. The driveway was empty and smooth and entirely mine. I parked. I went inside. I sat at my kitchen island with Renee's docket confirmation on my phone and Douglas Arrieta's original operating agreement open on the counter and the spreadsheet, every entry dated, every quote recorded, every pattern documented across 2 full years, open on my laptop. Then I picked up my phone and I sent Russell one message. It said, "Your attorney should have the civil complaint by now. I will be at the house until 10 tomorrow morning. After that I will be at my father's for the weekend. If you want to discuss any of this, you go through Renee." I set the phone down. I did not wait for a response. Somewhere in Wilmette, in the colonial house with the 3-car garage, a family was having a very different kind of Friday night than they had planned. Brenda was, I imagined, describing the evening to Gordon with both hands on her purse strap and a version of events in which she had been the injured party. Tiffany was, I imagined, texting someone about how insane this was. Gail had probably already reorganized something in the Wilmette living room to compensate for not being able to reorganize mine. And Russell was, I imagined, sitting with his phone and a civil court filing and the particular silence of a person who has just learned something about the person they thought they knew and is trying to find the shape of what comes next. There was no shape that worked in his favor. I had made sure of it methodically, beginning 4 years ago when I bought this house in cash and put it in an LLC, and continuing through every dated entry in the spreadsheet, and ending tonight at 9 minutes past 7 on a Saturday morning in Renee Foster's office on the 14th floor of a building on North Michigan Avenue. The cage was built. Every door was locked. The documentation was clean. Tomorrow morning, when Russell came to this house, and he would come, because Russell is a person who has to look at the thing he has done, he was going to stand in my foyer and realize, fully and finally, that the woman he thought he was marrying had never been the woman he thought she was. And he was going to meet, for the first time with full information, the woman she actually was. I closed the spreadsheet. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked through the dark house that is mine, through the restored foyer with the original tile, past the arched doorway, up the stairs with the landing floorboard that creaks, into my bedroom, where my wedding dress was still hanging on the back of the closet door in its garment bag, exactly where I had put it 4 days ago. I looked at it for a moment. Then I turned off the light and went to bed. By the time the sun came up over Evanston on Saturday morning, every signature was in place. Russell would come to this house expecting to find a fiancé who had reconsidered. He would find the founding partner of Beckett Title and Trust LLC, with a civil complaint on file, a temporary restraining order in reserve, and a family law attorney whose phone had been on all night. He had no idea who he was actually meeting. He came to the house at 8:47 on Saturday morning. I know the exact time because I was sitting at my kitchen island with my coffee and my laptop and the docket confirmation from Renee's filing, and I heard the sound of his car in the driveway, and I looked at the clock on the microwave before I looked at anything else. 8:47. 53 minutes before the deadline I had set in my text the previous night. I did not go to the door. He had a key. He used it. Russell came into the kitchen slowly, the way people move through spaces they are no longer sure they have permission to move through. And he stood at the edge of the kitchen with his jacket still on and his keys in his hand, and he looked at me across the island like a man who has spent the night drafting a sentence he is not sure is the right one. "Marlo," he said. I looked up from the laptop. I waited. I want to talk about this. His voice had the quality it gets when he is about to make an argument he has rehearsed, controlled, reasonable, with the faint scaffolding of the prepared underneath it. He is good at that register. He uses it with clients. He had used it on me once or twice in the 2 years we had been together, and I had always let it pass without naming it, which I understood now was a mistake I would not be repeating. Renee is available for any communication about the civil filing, I said. You have her number. He set his keys on the counter, my counter, and put his hand over them. I'm not here to talk about the filing. I'm here to talk about us. About the wedding. I closed the laptop. Then talk, I said. What followed was 22 minutes. I did not watch the clock the entire time, but I noted the start and end, in which Russell said, in various configurations, that he understood things had gotten out of hand, that his mother had acted on her own initiative in ways he had not fully authorized, that he had not understood the full legal picture of the house and wished I had told him, that the last 2 days had been a wake-up call, that he loved me, that he wanted to get married tomorrow, that we could figure out the rest. He said the phrase, figure out the rest, 3 times. I let him finish. I poured a second cup of coffee. I set it in front of him on the counter, which he took as a sign, I think, of softening. His shoulders came down slightly when I did it, and he wrapped both hands around the cup the way people hold something they have decided is an offering. Russ, I said, I need to ask you one question. Okay, he said. In 2 years, living in this house 3 nights a week, representing commercial real estate for 12 years professionally, did you ever look up the deed on this property? He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. Why not? He looked at his coffee. I trusted you. I held that answer for a moment, examining it. There are 2 ways to mean that sentence. The first is the generous one. He trusted me, and so he didn't feel the need to verify. The second is the one that had been operating the whole time, the real one, the one that announces itself in what a person doesn't do when they think they can afford not to. He had never asked because he had never thought the answer would be important enough to require asking. He had trusted me the way you trust a room. The way Gordon had said it at the anniversary dinner. That is the problem, I said, quietly. He looked up. Not the invoice. Not your mother. The 2 years before it. I kept my voice even. You never asked how I bought this house, Russ. Not once. And you are a commercial real estate broker. You know what it costs. You made a calculation, somewhere in the beginning, that either the answer didn't matter or the answer was slightly irregular and you preferred not to know. And either way you decided it wasn't something you needed to understand about the woman you were going to marry. He opened his mouth. Don't, I said. Not unkindly. Just specifically. He closed it. I am not angry at you, I said, which was true in the precise way that most difficult things are true, not completely and not simply, but true enough to say. But I am done. The wedding is not happening tomorrow. Renee will follow up about the civil matter by Monday. If you want to retain counsel and we need to discuss the engagement formally, we can do that through attorneys. He looked at me for a long time. His hands were still around the coffee cup. He said, you had this decided before I walked in. Yes, I said. Since when? I thought about my father at his kitchen table with his hand on his land map, asking whether Russell had ever asked how I bought the house. I thought about driving back down the highway toward Evanston with the answer. Since about 9:30 yesterday morning, I said. Give or take. Russell looked at the coffee cup. He looked at the island. He looked at the arched doorway into the foyer, where the original tile was doing what it always does, being exactly what it is, unchanged by the events of the last 36 hours. He said, what are you going to do? I am going to call my father, I said. And then I am going to go to the wedding venue and explain to the vendors that the event is canceled and make sure everyone is compensated for their time. And then I am going to come back here and go through the rest of my weekend as I see fit. He stood up. He picked up his keys. He held them for a moment. Marlo, he said. I'm sorry. I believed him. People can be sorry and also have been exactly what they were. Those 2 things coexist all the time. I know, I said. Go. He went. I listened to his car back out of the driveway. I listened to the sound of it move down Greenleaf Avenue and disappear. The house was quiet. The early June morning was doing its thing outside, the windows, birds, light, the sound of someone on the street walking a dog. I called my father. He answered on the second ring and said, "How are you?" "Good," I said. "The wedding is canceled. I'm coming up to the lake this afternoon if that's all right." A pause. A small one. "I'll put dinner on," he said. I hung up. I made a list of vendors to call. I called each one in order, starting with the caterer, because the caterer has the largest logistical exposure and deserves the most notice, and working through the florist, the photographer, the tent rental, the string quartet, and the woman who had been planning to make the cake. Each call was brief and professional. I explained that the wedding would not proceed. I confirmed that the deposits would be treated as cancellation fees, which is the contractual standard and which I had accounted for when I signed each agreement, because I sign every agreement with an understanding of what the cancellation terms mean. I thanked each person. I told them I was sorry for the short notice. Nobody said anything cruel. A few people were kind in the brief, specific way that service professionals are kind when they understand that something difficult has happened and it is not their role to make it about them. By 11:15, I was done. I did not call Brenda. I did not call Tiffany. I did not call Gail or Gordon. There was nothing to say to any of them that the civil filing had not already said more precisely. There was one call left. I dialed Renee. She picked up and I said, "The wedding is off." "He was here this morning." "How was he?" "Sorry," I said. "Genuinely, I think. A pause. "And you?" I looked out the kitchen window at the oak trees on Greenleaf Avenue. They were doing what they always do. "I'm going to my father's this afternoon," I said. "I'll be back Monday." "Take the weekend," she said. "The civil matter will be here Monday." "Renee," I said. "I need one thing before I go." "Tell me." "I need you to make sure that when the Pelhams find out the wedding is canceled, they hear it with the civil filing attached. Together. Not separately." A pause. And then Renee Foster, the most aggressive family law attorney in Cook County, made the sound she makes when a case has arrived at exactly the architecture she prefers. "I'll send the formal notice this afternoon," she said. Combined communication. "Thank you," I said. "Go to the lake," she said. "I'll handle the rest." I packed a bag. I watered my plants. I stood in my bedroom for a moment, where the garment bag with my wedding dress was still hanging on the back of the closet door. I unzipped it, looked at the dress for about 4 seconds. It is a beautiful dress, ivory crepe with a low back and simple lines, the kind of dress you buy when you know what you like and do not need anyone to tell you. And then I zipped it back up and left it where it was and walked downstairs. I locked the front door. I got in my car. I drove north. What I did not know yet, as I drove toward Wisconsin with the windows down and the early June sun on the lake blue sky, was that the Pelhams had already made a decision of their own. I found this out from a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Diane who had been on the wedding guest list and who texted me that afternoon while I was sitting on my father's dock watching the light on the water. The text said, "Did you see what Brenda posted?" I had not. Brenda Pelham had posted on the neighborhood social platform, not a national social network, but the local one, the one where people in Wilmette and Evanston and the surrounding North Shore communities discuss property values and noise complaints and lost cats. A post that had gone up at 12:47 that afternoon, approximately 90 minutes after Russell had driven away from Greenleaf Avenue. The post said, in full, "Heartbroken to share that the wedding between our son Russell and his fiancée has been called off, at her request, on the morning before the ceremony, without explanation or discussion. Our family is devastated. We were only ever trying to welcome her. Some people cannot accept being loved." There were 47 responses by the time I saw it. Most of them were sympathetic to Brenda. I went through the post once, completely, and I noted the timestamp and the platform and the specific language. Then I screenshotted it and sent it to Renee with one line, "Defamation supplement?" Renee replied within 6 minutes, "Potentially. Save it. We'll discuss Monday." I put my phone face down on the dock. My father came out from the house with 2 glasses of iced tea and sat in the chair beside me and handed me one without saying anything, which is a thing he does. We sat for a while and watched the lake, and I could hear, somewhere across the water, a loon doing what loons do in early June on Wisconsin lakes, which is to say making that sound that is not quite mournful and not quite celebratory, but something in between that I have always found accurate. She posted something, I said, eventually. My father drank his iced tea. She says I ended it without explanation. He set his glass down on the arm of the chair. He looked at the water. Dad, I said. What would you do? He thought about it. Calvin Beckett is not a man who answers quickly, because he is a man who has spent 31 years working with land, which teaches you that the right action at the right time is better than the fast action at any time. I would let her post, he said. And I would let the documents do the talking. I picked up my phone. I put it back down. She has 47 people agreeing with her, I said. For now, my father said. We sat on the dock until the sun started going down and turned the lake the color it turns in the evening, which is a different gold than the morning gold, warmer, more certain, the gold of a day that has been fully spent. Then we went inside and my father made dinner, and we ate at his kitchen table surrounded by his land maps and the particular quiet of a house that has always known what it is, and I slept for the first time in 2 days without difficulty. Sunday passed the way Sundays at the lake pass, slowly and specifically, with a particular quality of light and air that does not exist anywhere else. I went through the operating agreement. I made notes for Monday. I talked to Renee once, briefly. I called the firm's associate, a young attorney named Petra Navarro who has worked with me for 2 years and who handles the office while I'm unavailable, and I told her I would be in Monday and to hold anything that could wait. By Sunday evening, I had decided something that I had been deciding quietly for the better part of 48 hours, the way you decide things that have already been made by the time you consciously arrive at them. I was going to go to the neighborhood platform, not to fight Brenda's post, not to write a responding narrative. What I was going to do was post, in a community forum where 47 people had already seen Brenda's account and formed an impression, the Cook County Civil Case docket number. Just the docket number. With one sentence. The sentence was, public records are available at the Cook County Circuit Court website for anyone wishing to review the documentation of the events of June 7th. That was all. I posted it at 9:12 Sunday evening. By Monday morning, the post had been reviewed 43 times and Brenda's original post had 3 responses walking it back. One of them was from a woman who had worked at the Hyatt chain during the years Brenda was a regional manager and who wrote, with the careful phrasing of someone who has wanted to say something for a long time, I have to say, I'm not entirely surprised to see Brenda's version of events differ from the documented record. By Monday morning, Brenda had deleted the original post. I noted the timestamp of the deletion. I sent it to Renee. The civil complaint was formally served on Monday afternoon, delivered by process server to both Russell's residential address and the Wilmette family home. The complaint named Russell Gordon Pelham and Brenda and Pelham as co-defendants in a civil trespass action, cited the Cook County title records establishing Beckett Title and Trust LLC as the sole title holder of the Greenleaf Avenue property, attached the moving company invoice bearing both their signatures, and enumerated the legal fees accrued from the emergency Saturday filing of the no trespass enforcement as the basis for fee-shifting damages. It was a clean complaint. Douglas Arrieta had gone through it Sunday evening at my request and confirmed the title chain was unassailable. Renee had structured the damages claim conservatively, which is more effective than aggressively in a fee-shifting context because it is harder to attack. Russell called Renee's office at 2:15 on Monday afternoon. She told me he was looking for personal counsel and wanted to understand the exposure timeline. She told him to have his attorney call her. He asked if there was any way to discuss this outside the formal proceeding. She said, "There is no outside the formal proceeding. There is only the formal proceeding." He retained an attorney by Tuesday. Gordon called the same day, not Renee, but my firm number, which is a matter of public record, and which a commercial real estate broker's father-in-law who never was should have perhaps thought twice about before dialing. My associate Petra answered, confirmed that Beckett Title and Trust LLC was not taking calls related to pending civil matters, and offered to take a message. He left a message. It said, according to Petra's notes, Tell Marlo that Gordon called and that he wants her to know he never meant for any of this to happen. I instructed Petra to document the call and add it to the civil file. Gail did not call. Tiffany sent a text on Wednesday to my personal number. It said, "I just want you to know I never wanted to be part of this. The boxes were just boxes." I did not reply. I saved the text and forwarded it to Renee, who added it to the supplemental file she was building in the event the defamation supplement became worth pursuing. The Pelhams retained a single attorney to represent both Russell and Brenda, an error, as Renee noted, because their interests were not fully aligned. Russell had signed the invoice personally. Brenda had co-signed. Their respective exposures were slightly different in character, and a joint defense creates a conflict the moment the two parties' stories diverge. Their stories diverged on Thursday. I know this because Renee called me Thursday afternoon from her office and said, in the tone she uses when a case is developing in a direction she had predicted and finds professionally satisfying, Russell's attorney called. He wants to discuss a resolution. He's separating his client from Brenda in the narrative. Meaning, I said. Meaning Russell is prepared to stipulate that the invoice was signed in reliance on representations made by his mother that he now understands to have been inaccurate, and that he did not have independent knowledge of the LLC's title structure. I was quiet for a moment. How does Brenda feel about that characterization? Her attorney has not responded, Renee said. Of course she hadn't. I told Renee to let Russell's attorney understand that any resolution would require, at minimum, the full legal fee reimbursement, a written acknowledgement of the title structure of the LLC, and a signed release of any and all future claims related to the Greenleaf Avenue property. It would also, I said, require Russell's cooperation with any future proceeding regarding Brenda's co-liability. Renee said, that's going to be a hard sell. I said, he signed the invoice. The sell is what it is. She called back Friday with a counter. We spent the next 2 weeks in structured negotiations that I will not fully detail here except to say that Renee was exactly what she has always been, specific, relentless, and 3 steps ahead of the other side at all times. The resolution, when it came, was not a courtroom. It was a conference room on the 14th floor of the building on North Michigan Avenue at 9 in the morning on a Thursday in late June. The room has a long glass table and a view of the lake to the east, and on the morning we met it was one of those Chicago lake days where the water is almost perfectly blue and the light comes off it at the kind of angle that makes everything look clear and exact. I was there before anyone else. Renee was beside me. Douglas Arrieta was on the phone if needed. I had the full file, the deed, the operating agreement, the invoice, the trespass filing, the docket number, the neighborhood platform screenshots, the spreadsheet, everything dated, everything documented, in a clean labeled folder that I set on the table in front of my chair. Russell came in at 9:05 with his attorney, a man named Caldwell who was competent and careful and clearly not enjoying his morning. Russell was in a dark jacket. He looked like he had not been sleeping well. He did not look at the folder. His attorney looked at it. Brenda was not present. Her attorney had sent a letter that morning advising that she would not attend in person. I had expected this. It is the choice of a person who has decided that not witnessing the outcome is preferable to having to sit across from it. The meeting lasted 1 hour and 22 minutes. At the end of it, Russell Gordon Pelham signed a stipulation acknowledging that Beckett Title and Trust LLC held sole and unencumbered title to the Greenleaf Avenue property, that he had no interest, claim, or future right in the property or its value, and that the events of June 7th had constituted unauthorized entry to the property for which he accepted civil responsibility. The stipulation included a reimbursement provision for Renee's emergency filing fees, which was not a large number, but was a number that existed on paper, which is different from not existing. He signed it with a pen his attorney provided. He did not look at me while he signed. His attorney collected the copies. There was a moment after the signing, a brief administrative pause, when everyone in the room was doing what people do after a formal thing has been done, gathering papers, capping pens, checking phones, and in that moment Russell looked up. He looked at me directly. He said, I should have asked about the house. His attorney said his name, quietly, as a caution. I know, I said. He nodded. He stood. He went to the door. At the door he paused. He looked back at the room, at the glass table, at the lake view, at the folder in front of my chair with its labeled sections and its 2 years of documentation, and then he went out. Caldwell followed. The door closed. Renee picked up her pen. She made a notation on her legal pad. Then she looked at me across the table and said, Well, I said. She set the pen down. She looked at the lake. You know what the neighbors never found out, she said, is who actually lives at that address. I looked at the lake too. It was still doing what it was doing when we arrived, perfectly blue, light coming off it at that specific angle. They will, I said. She smiled. Not widely. Just specifically. Brenda's situation did not resolve as cleanly, because clean resolution requires an acknowledgement of the problem, and Brenda Pelham is not constitutionally capable of that kind of acknowledgement. Her attorney filed a response to the civil complaint that characterized her co-signature on the invoice as administrative assistance to her son without independent legal intent, which is the kind of argument that sounds like something until you put it next to the invoice and the title records and the docket, and it stops sounding like anything. Renee filed a reply brief. Brenda's attorney filed a motion to dismiss. Renee filed the supplemental defamation documentation, the neighborhood platform post, the screenshot, the timestamp of deletion, as an exhibit demonstrating a pattern of public misrepresentation about the events of June 7th. The motion to dismiss was denied. Brenda's attorney called on a Tuesday in July and asked what it would take to make the thing go away. Renee listed the terms. The attorney called back the following day and said his client wanted to discuss whether there was a relational resolution possible, meaning whether I would be willing to sit down with Brenda and talk. I told Renee no. Not because I am unforgiving, I am, in fact, a person who has a fairly functional relationship with forgiveness, which I tend to think of as something you do privately for your own maintenance, not as a gift you offer to people who have not asked for it correctly. But because a relational resolution is what Brenda wanted, and what Brenda wanted in this particular context was a private conversation where she could manage the narrative the way she manages everything, with both hands on the purse strap and the performance of helplessness and the opportunity to say something that sounded like an apology but contained, somewhere inside it, a rearrangement of blame. I did not owe her that room. The civil matter resolved in August. Brenda settled. The settlement terms are not something I am going to say in full, but I will tell you that Renee was thorough and that the number was real and that it included a clause requiring Brenda to refrain from further public statements about the events of June 7th or the title status of the Greenleaf Avenue property. She signed it. I know, from a mutual acquaintance, that she told her book club that she had signed something for legal reasons and was unable to discuss the matter further, which is accurate in the narrowest sense, and which has the added benefit of sounding more interesting than the specifics, which I am sure she finds useful. I spent the rest of that summer in the Evanston house. I refinished the upstairs landing. I finally fixed the floorboard that creaks. I bought a new hall table for the foyer, also from an estate sale, a different one, a narrow oak piece with slightly curved legs that is not from Portugal, but has the same quality of being exactly what it is and not apologizing for it. I did not replace the hall table from Portugal. I moved it to my office, beside the topographic map of the Great Lakes, where it has stayed. There was this one evening in late July, a Tuesday, warm in the specific way of Midwest July evenings when the heat is finally off the day, but the air still holds it. When I was sitting on my front porch with a glass of wine and Renee texted to say that the August settlement date had been confirmed. I went through the text once. I set my phone on the railing and I looked at Greenleaf Avenue in the evening light, at the oak trees doing their oak tree thing, at the neighbors walking their dogs and the kids on bikes, and the particular quality of a tree-lined street in a Midwest summer when the light goes sideways and turns everything a shade of gold that makes everything look as though it has always been exactly as it should be. I permitted myself one small thing. I smiled. Not widely. Not for anyone who was watching. Just the smile of a person who has arrived at the other side of something and found the other side to be solid ground. Brenda Pelham, 62, retired regional manager, settled a civil trespass action in August and has not publicly discussed the events of June 7 since. The settlement terms prohibit her from doing so. She remains in the Wilmette Colonial. I am told she has taken up pickleball. Russell Pelham, 36, commercial real estate broker, signed his stipulation in June and has since relocated his primary office to the downtown Chicago market, which is a natural career move and also a practical distance from the North Shore communities where the events of that June weekend are, among certain people, a matter of some record. He is, as far as I can determine, doing fine. He is the kind of person who will be fine. That is neither a compliment nor an indictment. It is just accurate. Gail, 58, took her improvements elsewhere. I believe she is redoing a friend's kitchen in Naperville. I genuinely hope the kitchen benefits from her attention. Tiffany, 29, is still in her apartment 20 minutes from Evanston. She sent a second text in late July that I also did not respond to. I saved it. I doubt it will be relevant. Gordon Pelham, 66, did not call again after the Monday message. Petra documented the single call, which was added to the file and which will remain there. He continues, I believe, to describe his family as having good architecture. Renee Foster is exactly who she has always been on the 14th floor, coffee on, handling the cases that require the architecture to be correct from the beginning. Douglas Arietta, who built that architecture 4 years before any of this happened, called me in September to ask how I was doing. I told him. He said, the operating agreement held. I said, the operating agreement held. It was a brief call and a complete one. My father is at the lake, as he always is. I went up in September and we sat on the dock and he updated his land map, the fall version, which shows the tree stands after leaf drop, which he always finds clarifying. And we talked about the property and what he wants to do with the East Meadow in the spring. He asked how I was. I said good. He said, good. We sat on the dock until the light was gone.